the next thing that I want to refresh your memory on is when we see word problems, quadratic word problems, how we go ahead and solve them. So here is a word problem I have for you. And it says a ball is thrown from a building that's 40 feet off the ground. So the person with the ball is 40 feet off the ground. They're in a building. Its initial velocity is 112 feet per second. Use the equation negative 16t squared plus 112t plus 40 equals h of t. T is the time in seconds and h is the height. So I want you to remember, like when we are thinking about word problems with a quadratic function, and we know it's quadratic because it has an exponent of 2, it's going to end up showing us a picture. And usually the picture is someone's jumping off of a diving board or a ball is being thrown, where we can see a nice parabola. And that's what's happening here. Somebody is in a building and they are throwing a ball off of the building, and they want to know, well, I want to ask you some questions, but this is the basic gist of it, all right? Now, what the questions that are usually asked, there's 2 of them. In a situation like this, they're usually going to ask you, where is the highest point, referring to the vertex, or when or where will the ball hit the ground. Sometimes they might ask you, where is the ball going to be in 10 seconds, in 2 seconds? So I want to kind of answer all of those questions based on this. Now, the one thing I want you to know is that if they give you a formula and this other information, you can trust the formula. People are not, I am not, the EOC, anyone is not going to give you an equation and then it's the wrong equation. So that's a nice little added bonus. Okay, so let's say that they ask us to find where the ball is in 2 seconds, okay? Then all you would do, if the question was, like, what is the height? What's the height of the ball in 2 seconds? All you would do is plug 2 into t, because the t stands for time. So negative 16 2 squared plus 112 times 2 plus 40, and then 2 squared is 4. I know I'm just doing little baby steps here so you can see everything. Whoop. Okay, so you have negative 64 plus 224 plus 40, and then I'm going to put that all in my calculator. And we got that after 2 seconds, the ball is going to be 200 feet off the ground. Okay, that's a crazy ball, but anyway. All right, so that, and you, whatever time you would just plug into there. If you got a negative number, you know, let's say they asked you where would the ball be in an hour. Well, obviously the ball has probably hit the ground already. Then you would get a negative number. So you would, you know, the ball is not going to go underneath the ground. So you would just say that it is on the ground, even if you end up getting a negative number and it's a real life situation like this. Okay, the second kind of question that they're going to ask, or that I'm going to ask, is where is the maximum height? So what we need to do is find the vertex. To find the vertex, if you remember correctly, you're going to use the formula negative b over 2a. So if we look back to our original equation, we know that a is negative 16, b is 112, and c is 40. So negative b, negative 112 over 2 times a. So negative 112, negative 32, and that's going to end up being 3.5. So at 3.5 seconds, we know it's going to be at the maximum height. So it depends, you really have to pay attention to the question. If it says, when will it get to the maximum height, your answer is going to be 3.5. If the question is, how high, what is the maximum height, then you need to plug this 3.5 back in to the original equation. So negative 16, 3.5 squared. See, I'm just plugging in that 3.5. Hopefully you can follow my work here. Whoops. Ah. And then put that all in your calculator. So that is going to be the maximum height. So if we go back to the original, after 2 seconds, it got to 200, 3.5 seconds, it reached its maximum height, which is 236. So the other question is it's going to ask is, when is it going to hit the ground? Now, so we can't just double this because it didn't start, like we know our parabolas are symmetrical, but this, you know, it's not halfway through because it does go through, it started at, it didn't start at the ground, the ball started at the height of the building. So we can't just double our 3.5 and say, oh, it lands on the ground at 7, because that's when it would probably be right about here, right? Because it's, remember, parabolas are very symmetrical. So we have to use the quadratic function, the quadratic formula, sorry. So I'm going to try to cram this on my paper, even though the quadratic formula is so long. Remember, negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. And I'm doing that because it doesn't look like this is going to be easy to factor. I have a b, so I'm not going to use square roots. So I'm just going to, instead of completing the square, I'm just going to go ahead and plug it in here. I can still use this information to tell me my a, b, and c. So negative 112 plus or minus square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c all over 2 times a. Okay, so I'm just going to spiffy this up, make it look a little bit nicer. Now, some people were a little confused on this part, how we simplify this. So 112 squared gets me 1, 2, 5, 4, 4. And then I have to multiply these 3 together. I don't distribute this because there's no plus in here. It's not in parentheses. I just have to multiply those 3 together, and the order doesn't matter. The commutative property tells me that. So I'm going to do 16 times 4 times 40. I notice it's a negative and a negative, which is going to get me a positive, plus 2560 all over negative 32. Whoops. Okay, so from there, I'm going to keep this negative 112 plus or minus. And because I actually, then I'm going to go ahead and add those 2 together. 1,500, over negative 32. Okay, because I'm actually trying to figure out how many seconds, I don't really want to leave my answer in a radical, so I'm going to convert that to a decimal right now by square rooting it. And I now have negative 112 plus or minus 122.898, which gets me 0.9 over negative 32. And so at this point, I have to split my answer. I have to say from here, I'm gonna have just enough room, it's negative 112 plus 122.9 over negative 32. And then I'm gonna have my other problem, negative 112 minus 122.9 over negative 32. So I'm gonna do my numerator first, 112 negative plus 122.9. It's going to get me 10.9 over negative 3.2. I know this is going to get me a negative answer, which is not what I want. So this is getting me negative 3.4. And I know that doesn't make sense because I can't have a negative, I can't have negative time. That's probably, you know, if the parabola went all the way back here. So hopefully this one will not give me a negative answer. 112 negative minus 122.9 is negative 234.9 over negative 32. And I get my 7.34. So in 7.34 seconds, that is when it will hit the ground, because that is my time. So if you plug this in, now remember, it might vary a tiny bit just because of rounding, you know, I had to round up here. So, you know, and that's good enough. And on the test, the same thing's going to happen. Your answers are going to be close enough and they'll work. So in 7.3 seconds, it will hit the ground. Okay, thank you. And that's it for a word problem.